Grantley here again with the hero's journey. The thing that got me really thinking about doing all of this was about a month ago. I was talking to one of my daughter's Kung Fu students. My daughter teaches Kung Fu. As a teenager, she's going through a bit of a rough time, but she's doing extremely well at Kung Fu. And she's doing some work in school on, I forget what the story is, but it's a novel and they're doing the hero's journey. And she asked me some questions, and in the midst of her questions, as we were talking, she seemed really to be enjoying the conversation. She said, "Is there a villain's journey? Is there such thing as the villain's journey?" And I never really thought about it like that, and none of my students teaching high school had ever asked me that question, and it never come up to me exactly like that there might be a specific journey for the villain. So I answered the best I could and told her I would think about it. And we talked a couple of weeks later, and I gave her some examples of what I thought might be the villain's journey. And it turns out, the more I think about it, the more there is to say about it. So I'm working towards that. But to understand the villain, you need to understand, first of all, the hero and what is the hero in the hero's journey. Who is he or who is she? They're typically young men, but quite often they're girls. And the journey is essentially the same, at least in terms of the archetypes. And when you have a hero, you have somebody who is usually kind of young. Typically, they're missing at least one parent, and it's usually the parent of the same sex. So girls are missing the mom, boys are missing their dad. And either the parent is completely out of the picture, as in The Little Mermaid, we just never hear anything about her mom, or somehow, or we know that the father is dead or missing. And what happens is you have a young person who has a kind of restless sense of wanting to get out of what they know, get out of their village, get out from under the sea, go over the mountain, cross the desert, go to the city, leave wherever they have become relatively familiar, and think at least that they know where they are and what their home is. That's not to say that they properly understand their home or their own upbringing, but they understand it well enough so that on a day-to-day basis it doesn't seem to present any surprises. And so they're inclined to want more. Some have a specific purpose. Mulan wants to go to war. And she's held back by the cultural norms of her day. Some want to leave. Luca and Ariel will give two examples of heroes who want to leave the ocean. Some want just to get out or go on an adventure or do something that isn't necessarily bad, but is also somehow not respectable. Bilbo comes from 2 or 3 different family lines that converge in him, and some of them are quite respectable, but some of them have sketchy histories. And the only thing really suspect about some of his ancestors is that they left the Shire and came back somewhat transformed. And Bilbo is older than humans than the humans he runs with, but still considered young-ish. He's an example of what we might call today failure to launch. He's just sort of grown up and inherited a comfortable home. And that's actually how his life starts. Tolkien wrote, and this was the beginning of the story, just at the top of his head, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Then he goes on to explain that for hobbits, a hole in the ground wasn't just a nasty, smelly, wet hole. It meant comfort, and everything about Bilbo's life was comfort. So he had everything that most people are looking for when they're babies or when they've retired. And yet there was something in him that was at least drawn to the stories of his ancestors who had gone out and done things. And he knew Gandalf. And Gandalf was beloved by the kids, a little bit, made the parents in the neighborhood a little bit leery. But he would come and go, and he didn't seem to cause many problems, but he wasn't from the Shire. It wasn't really so much that he was a wizard, because they thought he was just kind of a traveling trickster or magician, nothing terribly dangerous, but he wasn't from the Shire. He was from the outside world. And many stories are about the hero trying to get into the outside world. In fact, they're all trying to get out to the outside world. Where you see that not obviously the case is in something like Home Alone, where Kevin doesn't leave home, but the family leaves. And all of a sudden, home is a place that's not quite as safe as he thought it was. So what makes a home is not necessarily the actual location, but the people you're living with. And he's comfortable mouthing off to them and treating them badly because he knows that he's protected. He's good to go. But he has a sense that his family doesn't love him, that there's some sense of injustice, and so he has that sense of restlessness. And so it's very common. The hero wants to leave. Sometimes they're forced to leave, but there's always a sense that where they are is not enough. What they're doing isn't enough. Now, what is surrounding the hero? Usually it's well-meaning family members, teachers, clergy, bosses, best friends, who want what's best in a very practical way for the hero. But want what's best in pursuit of avoiding risk, avoiding the risk of failure, the risk of death, the risk of embarrassment, the risk of injury, any kind of risk. Parents want their kids to stay safe, keep them close, but the hero has to leave. And I think something like The Good Dinosaur is an example of the hero sort of being forced to leave. But either way, they know they don't fit. There's something about them that does not fit, and they will not be acceptable to themselves until they've headed out into the world. And that's the beginning of the hero. A sense of needing to be purposeful. Now, getting to the question of, is there a villain's journey? The hero of the villain, or the journey of the villain? I think, and I can think of several examples, but one is when the hero or the villain, who already thinks they're a hero and already thinks that they're entitled to some sense of acknowledgement as a hero. The most blatant example is Loki in all the Avengers movies in the MCU. Every time he shows up, he states his name and then declares that he is burdened with glorious purpose. But there's never a sense of what that purpose is other than to be acknowledged for his glorious purpose. And since he has nothing good to do, he either stagnates the local society or destroys it. But he doesn't build anything. He hasn't come back from any kind of a journey. He has never even really gone on much of a journey. Just really thinks he's already the hero. Sometimes a proper hero already thinks they're a hero. In fact, quite often they do. And they begin to become a hero when they realize that what they thought was a hero, or what they thought they were doing that was heroic, isn't. Quite often they have a skill set of some kind. It's not massive, but it's enough, and it's surprisingly useful in the future. Hobbits can throw stones. Hobbits can walk quietly. So that's kind of nothing, except Bilbo is called to be a thief. Captain Marvel, and there's a lot wrong with the movie Captain Marvel, but she's not actually a Mary Sue, because she has a prior life where she was already a qualified military pilot and had all kinds of training. But so they bring something to the table. It's just not properly refined. It's not properly understood. Luke is able to blow up the Death Star because after some training, he's able to bring back his crop dusting days and flying those hovercrafts So his experience all over the sand dunes, where that actually comes to bear later in the movie, or at the end of the movie when he blows up the Death Star. And so then they don't come empty-handed when it comes to skills and talents, but they're incredibly raw, and they don't know how to use them, and they don't know what they're for. But what matters most is that they have a sense of purpose. They just don't know what that purpose is. They want to find it, or at the very least, they know there's more out there in the world than what they know at home. And they have to leave. And all the people who love them, all the people who care about them, who want what's best for them, almost all of them will do everything they can to keep the hero from going on that journey, because they want what's best. And from at its most basic, they want the hero to be safe. And the hero's journey is a risk. You risk everywhere, everything from public embarrassment to death and all the stuff that's in between. But there is some kind of risk. And moms and dads don't want their kids to risk. It's their job to protect. But it's the job of the hero to step outside that protection. So how does that apply to you? Well, if you are doing all right with life, or somehow, but dissatisfied, either life is good and it's unsatisfying, or life is crappy and therefore unsatisfying, you really need to head out beyond what you know. There's endless research about getting out of your comfort zone, but it boils down to, that's what the hero has to do to begin to become an actual hero. Failure to do that means you don't even get a chance to become a villain. You just stay what you are. And as the years pass, there's nothing more dissatisfying than realizing you haven't done anything. And not only have you not tried to become better, you're just the same person you were 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, but with less potential than you had back then. That leads to bitterness. That leads to shooting other people's dreams down. That leads to you becoming some sort of not very impressive villain. Not even a cool villain. So if you have that sense that you need to be doing more, that you'd like to get out of the world you know, then maybe the hero's journey is for you.